All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening and taking time out of your day. Welcome to Wine 101 with our Clif family winemaker, Laura Barrett. We are very, very excited to have her share some tips and tricks and a little bit about the wines that you're going to be enjoying this evening. So tonight, Laura is going to be guiding you through a fun and engaging and educational conversation about wine. We can learn professional tips on how to open, serve, and analyze wines a little bit for your optimal tasting experience. So without further ado, I wanted to go ahead and introduce Laura Barrett. Laura, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Candace. Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Barrett. I have been the winemaker here at Clif Family since 2014. And I am originally from Massachusetts. I studied science as an undergraduate back east and decided that I wanted to become a winemaker. I drove across the country in search of the Napa Valley. And I landed here in 2001, where I got my graduate degree at UC Davis and started working in the Napa Valley wine industry. I was lucky enough to work at Fisher Vineyards for 5 years as their assistant winemaker. And then I became head winemaker for a brand called Casey Flat Ranch. And I did that for 7 years. And then landed here at Clif Family in November of 2014. So my journey really began with the 2015 vintage, where I was able to start farming the vineyards from the very beginning of the growing season. So really, I consider my first vintage at Clif Family as 2015 from grape to bottle.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Laura. Well, before we get into everything here, I just wanted to remind everyone, feel free to drop questions into the chat. Laura and I will be happy to answer them along the way. I'll be sure as she's kind of explaining through the experience, we'll have times for Q&A, and I'll be sure those questions get her way. And I also want to remind all the Napa Valley Marathon participants can earn that Wine Stopper medal for completing the 1 mile distance, and I believe the corkscrew for completing the 10K, or the wine tumbler for completing the half marathon. So I know I would absolutely love to hear how everyone's running journey is going. So feel free to drop in the chat who's joining us today, where you're joining from. Very interested to see who all throughout the country, where you guys are, and kind of where you are with your running and your kind of progress with all of that. I know a lot of you have been working really hard. All right, so for those who purchased the Wine 101 tasting kit, the wines that we're going to be tasting through this evening and enjoying is the 2019 Root Blanc Sauvignon Blanc. I already have some in my glass. And then the 2018 Napa Valley Petite Syrah. So if you haven't yet, please pour yourself a glass and toast to all of you for your hard work through this amazing experience. So cheers to all of you. All right, well, before we, let's get into it. Let's get into the 2019 Root Blanc. Like I said, I already had myself poured a little bit in the glass, and I absolutely love this wine. It's been kind of a staple in our portfolio here at Clif Family. So Laura, could you tell us a little bit about the vineyard it comes from and its journey into the bottle?
Yes, Sauvignon Blanc is one of my favorite varietals to make. It's very fun in that you get to put together all the pieces of a puzzle, and it's kind of like instant gratification as opposed to the long term that you wait for finishing a red wine. So, you know, the wine comes together very quickly, very fruit forward, and it's a lot of fun to put together and then in the bottle by January of the following year. So it starts in the vineyard, as always. Sauvignon Blanc grapevines can be quite vigorous. And this particular vintage and wine comes from two sites quite local here in the Napa Valley. One is right here in downtown St. Helena called the Amendola Vineyard. And it's about 1.5 acres. And it's a very small site, but been a huge kind of foundation for this particular wine over the years. And then the other half comes from a certified organic vineyard just down the road in the town of Yountville called Yount Mill Vineyards. And together, those grapes make up the Root Blanc. So the name of this wine, Root Blanc, it's also known as the White Road, which is a very common phrase that Gary uses, Gary Erickson, one of our owners, in business and in his personal journey to take the road less traveled. The white roads on the map tend to be the ones that are less traveled. So that's where the name comes from. And Sauvignon Blanc grapes, we tend to pick them on the lower end of the ripeness scale. And I really look for what we call this golden and green combo in the skins. So those clusters that are more buried inside the canopy stay really green. They stay very tart and high acid. And then the bunches that are on the outside, more exposed to the sun, get a little bit more golden in color, and you get a little bit more of those tropical flavors, and you have less acidity. So the balance of this golden and green concept comes together beautifully in the juice and in the finished wine. So you get a balance of fresh acidity, a nice tart, lower alcohol wine, but with a lot of really pretty fruit flavors. So for white winemaking, we pick the grapes and they go directly into the press. And the press is like a giant balloon that's going to squeeze the juice out of and separate the juice from the rest of the skins, seeds, pulp, and stems. So the juice gets separated immediately and put into a tank and chilled down nice and cold for a couple of days while it settles out some solids. Then we rack that cold juice off the solids. So we have now just a clarified form of the grape juice. And then it gets inoculated with cultured yeast and temperature controlled in that tank for about 10 days usually. So I start the fermentation and I want to have control over the temperature, because if it gets too warm, then it goes really quickly. I'd like a really slow, cool fermentation for this wine. It really preserves that fruit character in the nose. And then when I'm about halfway through fermentation, it then goes down to barrel. So this particular wine is about 84% stainless steel barrels and 16% neutral French oak barrels. So they are French oak, but I use the term neutral, meaning that they're old barrels. It's not fresh new oak that imparts a lot of flavor into the wine. So this is not an oaky wine at all. You don't pick up any oak character in the nose, but I do get that barrel vessel so that I can stir the lees, which is the solids at the bottom of the barrel, and that develops a really nice texture on the palate. And I get that sort of delicate oxidation. So the wine changes with a little bit of air that comes through the stave of the oak portion of this wine. And once the wine is in barrel, it stays there for about 4 months and then begins the bottling prep process where the wine comes out of barrel just one time. It gets blended into back into tank and then ready for stabilization. So white wines, we spend a lot of time stabilizing them. And the real reason is just for aesthetics. We want to make sure that if the wine gets chilled down too cold, it's not going to precipitate out any tartaric acid crystals. Or if the wine gets too hot, it's not going to precipitate out any proteins. So all of this is just for preserving the visual clarity of the wine. And then we filter it, of course, because we want it to be clear and in a pretty color in the glass. And then it gets bottled. And you'll notice that this is bottled under a screw cap. So it's kind of a defining feature. This is also part of what we call our Adventure Series wines. And those are the wines that have a photographic label. And they're meant to be the ones that you take out on the road, take with you to the movies, take on your next bike ride, take to the beach, those wines that are ready to be on the go. Back to you, Candace.
Fabulous. Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, you had mentioned screw top. And some of our wines have the screw top and some of the wines have a cork. Would you be able to kind of share to our listeners what kind of the difference is and why you chose to have a screw top on the Sauvignon Blanc versus a cork stopper?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the purpose of a closure is obviously just to seal the wine in the bottle. And there are many different types of closures. There's cork, there's screw cap, there's glass finish, there's wine in a can. There's all types of way to close the wine into its package. The difference between a cork and a screw cap is that the cork, number one, has a lot more variability. So cork is a porous material. It's actually the bark of a tree, and it's porous. So just like wood from an oak barrel, oxygen can permeate through the material. And although it's not going to leak, it's not going to let liquid out, oxygen does come in. And with a screw cap, you do get a small amount of that oxygen coming through, but it's far less and it's far more controlled, because if you can consider cork as a very natural product where the the porosity of a cork varies from cork to cork, from tree to tree. So you're going to get a lot more variation in that process. So with a screw cap, you get a more consistent closure. But however, a lot of people really believe that that cork is part of the natural aging process of the wine once it's in bottle. So there is there's a feeling about a cork, about removing a cork from a bottle, that is very traditional, and also many of us consider a very important part of the aging process. So I like to say that we bottle wines under a screw cap that we want to encourage you to drink now. So if we want you to put this wine in your cellar and age it for 5 years, and then dip into it once a year for the next decade, that wine is definitely going to have a cork in it. But if I want you to open this wine and drink it right away, I put a screw cap on it. And also, it's part of the theme of the adventure series. So if you're going to take something on the go, it's easy not to need a corkscrew. So there are many reasons, but I think the number one winemaking decision is that it's a drink now kind of wine, and not necessarily meant to be bottle aged for a significant time.
So for anybody, everyone who's joining us tonight, you should be having that lovely Root Blanc in front of you. If you don't, that's okay. I dropped the link to it, so you can be sure to check it out, and be sharing some special offers too at the end of this evening for joining us. So if you really enjoyed that wine and you want to stock up, we have a great way to enjoy that at a special price. So yeah. So with the Sauvignon Blanc, Laura, I know for me, I mean, sometimes it depends on the time of the week. I can very easily finish a whole bottle of Sauvignon Blanc to myself, no judgment. But sometimes, it's kind of, you just want to enjoy a glass of wine, and maybe, a few days later enjoy another glass or share it with a friend. What is the best time frame once you open that bottle of Sauvignon Blanc? How much time do you have to enjoy it?
Yeah, if you're not going to finish it right away, I'd say white wines tend to be more susceptible to oxidation than red wines. So that means that due to the lack of color and the lack of tannin in the wine, it just tends to oxidize quicker, which means that it loses its fruitiness, it loses its aromatics, and it becomes just a little bit kind of flabby, what I would call flabby on the palate. It doesn't go bad, like if you leave a gallon of milk on the counter for a day, but it just changes with the exposure to air. So I would say with this Sauvignon Blanc, you could leave it easily for 2, maybe 3 days, and you'll notice the character of the aromatics changing a little bit with time, but it's still very enjoyable and very drinkable. A red wine could last probably double that amount of time, maybe 2 to 6 days. And then there are all these fancy tools that you can buy to replace the air with some form of gas, whether it be nitrogen or argon, and that protects the wine for a longer period of time. So some people have those fancy tools, and then they can have the wine sit on the counter for a lot longer. However, if the white wine is there for 10 days and you taste it and you say, oh gosh, this doesn't taste like it did a week ago, I always use it to make risotto. So the minute my daughter smells the cooking wine, she says, oh, we're having risotto for dinner. It's a great use for it.
That's great. And so we've been getting a lot of great feedback. People are like, we love screw tops. This wine is tasting amazing. And even Allie shared, we like using leftover white wine in our pasta sauces. And then I was going to share that with everyone, but also the risotto. I have to say that is something I enjoyed a lot of this summer, except I needed an excuse to open a bottle of wine. So I would use that, and then I would drink the rest of it while I enjoyed my risotto. But we do have, Derek is asking food pairing recommendations. I know for myself, we are huge fans and work really closely with Cowgirl Creamery. If you are a fan of or have ever heard of Mount Tam, it is an amazing cheese. I think I even enjoyed it a little bit earlier today, but paired with our Meyer lemon marmalade. You have that cheese in a cracker and you pour a little bit of the Meyer lemon marmalade, enjoy that bite and a sip of this wine. It is such a fun pairing. It is absolutely delicious. Of course, goes great with chicken, fish. I think even the risotto, you use the wine in the risotto. It also goes great with risotto, but I don't know if you have any favorite dishes that you like to enjoy with the Sauvignon Blanc, Laura.
Yeah, I love the whole concept of opening up a bottle while you're cooking. It's something that it's almost impossible for me to cook without a glass of wine in my hand. So to open this while you're making risotto and then enjoy it along with your meal would be a perfect comparative, similar type pairing. The other thing that comes to mind, which I had last week, is grilled artichokes with like a tarragon aioli, something like that with, you know, the lemon as an accent, sort of that citrus flavor in the wine would be amazing. And this is also a fantastic summertime poolside wine where if you drink it just very cold on a hot summer afternoon, it's amazing by itself as well.
Wonderful. I love looking at the chat and see what's happening. Some people are like, I rarely have leftover wine. So you need to go the approach where you need to open up a bottle to cook and then you get to enjoy the rest. Wonderful. Well, I hope everyone's really enjoying sipping and enjoying this wine. Again, like I said, it's very easy for me to have a bottle to myself. It's just so easy to drink. And Laura, you've done such a great job. You've done an amazing job with all of our wines, but this is a wine I definitely look forward to the release of every year.
Well, if you guys are feeling coming your way soon too. I just bottled the 2020.
Perfect. Oh, I'm so excited. Yes.
April,
yeah. Laura's been very busy in the cellar, and maybe at the end of this, you can kind of give a little what you're currently working on too for everyone. It's a very exciting time. I think this part of the year, it's the bottling process and all the different stages of the winemaking process. So, well, if you guys are feeling ready for it, no judgment if you have another glass in your hand. I thought we could go a little bit into the 2018 Napa Valley Petite Syrah. I actually host a lot of our virtual tasting experiences here at Clif. And my intro to this wine is always, there is nothing petite about it. So Laura, I'll kind of let you take it away with this great wine.
Yeah, so Petite Syrah is in no way related to Syrah. They're completely different grapes. Petite Syrah, the traditional original name for it in France was called Durif, D-U-R-I-F. And they started to call it Petite Syrah because of it has very, very small berries. So in the field, it's a vigorous vine. It has very large leaves, and the berries are very, very, very small, but they're densely packed in the cluster. So they're very, very tight clusters and small. And because of the small berries, if you think about the amount of skin that you have, which is where all the color and the tannin comes from, to the amount of juice that's in a small berry versus, say, a table grape that you would get at the grocery store. You're always changing your skin to juice ratio when you change the size of your berry. So this very small, highly pigmented grape makes a lot of color and a huge, huge red wine. It's the biggest, darkest red wine that I make, even bigger and darker than Cabernet. So in the winery, I have to spend a lot of time managing the tannins here because I don't want it to be overly tannic. It's a really important part of the winemaking and fermentation process. So just a little bit of information on how a red wine fermentation works. We talked about white winemaking where you actually separate the juice immediately and the skins and the seeds and the stems are composted immediately on day one. It's a little different with red winemaking. Red grapes are destemmed, so there's a machine that plucks the berry off of the stalk. The stalk gets composted immediately, and the skins and the seeds and all of the juice come together in a fermentation tank. And then during the fermentation process, we have, fermentation is a very simple chemical reaction. Sounds complicated, but it's quite simple, where it's the conversion of the sugar in the grape to alcohol and carbon dioxide. So the amount of sugar that you have in your grape directly impacts the amount of finished alcohol you have in your wine. And the carbon dioxide is a really important compound because when you create carbon dioxide, all of the skins rise to the top of the tank. And then all of this fermenting bubbly juice is down at the bottom. So in order to get the most that we can out of our skins, which gives us our color and our tannin, we do what we call a pump over, where we take a pump and we suck the juice or the fermenting wine from the bottom of the tank and all the way up and over to the top of the tank. So you can kind of shower the juice and the fermenting wine over the skins. And some people do that twice a day. Some people do it 6 times a day. It depends on your winemaking technique for that particular winemaker and that particular varietal. So with Petite Sirah, I have to be really careful here. If I were to pump over 6 times a day, that this would be the most tannic, dry tasting wine you've ever had, and you probably wouldn't like it. So I have to be careful and pump over less. I use less heat, and also remove the wine from the skins a little early. So that's the process that we call pressing. So when the fermentation is finished, we remove the finished wine and it goes to another tank. And then the skins are still quite juicy. So those go back into the press, that same press that we press the white grapes in, and you squeeze them until all of the juice comes out. And then you have your press fraction component, which can either get put back into the main tank or it can be kept separate. So I do this process quite early on the Petite Sirah, again, with the effort of managing the extraction. So this particular wine, I absolutely love drinking Petite Sirah. It can be kind of your weeknight big red. You don't have to open your expensive Cabernets. You can kind of pick this one for your burger night or your pizza night. I love the really dark inky color that will almost stain your clothes. In fact, it will stain your clothes. It's always very ripe blueberry and blackberry, so amazing aromatics, but it also has this spice and black pepper component that I think is particularly prominent in the 2018 vintage that you have here. 2018 was a very cold year. It was a very cool, mellow growing season. We didn't have any heat spikes. And the finished reds were higher in acid and less ripe character. So in a Petite Sirah, when you have this less ripe character, you end up with black pepper, which sometimes you can even smell on the crush pad when you're destemming. It's amazing. You walk through and you would notice it. It's really exciting. And then as far as wine pairings go with this wine, the sky is the limit with your richest blue cheese, your burger off the grill in the summertime, your winter stews that you're making right now. It's very versatile, but definitely kind of more of a cooler weather, cool down by the fire type wine because of its richness.
I agree. I know usually the picture I paint for those who usually join us in our virtual experiences and the tastings that we do is I picture myself in my coziest sweater. I wore this turtleneck in honor of the Petite Sirah. I like to be in my coziest sweater. Ideally, it's raining outside, the fireplace is going, and I'm enjoying a beautiful steak followed by a very decadent chocolate dessert. I think those two things just go really, really nicely for it. And now I am craving dinner, and that sounds kind of delicious to have as well too. I do have to say, I know that Laura, you mentioned, it's just very dark and inky in color. Sometimes what I do is when I take the cork out, I use it as a stamp, and I stamp whatever paper I have, and I see how many times I can do it. And for some people, I'll do it on their napkin. If you happen to visit us in the tasting room, then they have a nice little souvenir of that Petite Sirah. Great. We're getting a lot of great feedback. I'm so excited. I was going to say, you guys have any questions, feel free to get some of those last questions in here. I did have one coming to you, Laura. With this wine being so big and bold as it is this a wine that you would recommend decanting, or what is your philosophy behind decanting wines?
Well, there's 2 reasons to decant a wine. So the first is that you need to remove it from its solids. So wine is a living creature, even after it's bottled. It is constantly evolving and changing, all because of that small, very controlled amount of oxygen that's coming into the bottle as it ages. So part of that process is that it precipitates out, sometimes it's tannin molecules that become so big and bound that then they fall out of solution because they're so large. So you do get a little bit of lees formation, just like you have in the barrel aging process. It also happens in the bottle. So as a wine gets older, you're going to want to decant it to remove the wine off of the solids and leave behind the chunky solids in the decanter. Otherwise, you end up with them in your glass, and then you take that last sip and it's all, coming down the side of your glass. So that's the first reason. The second reason is perhaps a younger wine that needs some aeration. So remember, we've talked a lot about oxygen tonight. Oxygen is constantly changing the wine, whether it's in a negative way because it's sitting on your counter for 5 days and it's oxidizing, or in a very positive way because you're swirling it in your glass. That's the whole reason why we swirl, is to aerate the wine and oxygenate the wine so that it then releases the aromatics. So younger wines are decanted for aeration, and older wines are decanted to remove the solids. So for this particular wine, if you have a decanter, it would be a great thing to do. But you don't have to carefully pour it. You can literally turn the bottle upside down and glug, glug, glug. That's what you want. You want to aerate the wine. And then you can swirl it around in the decanter, and you can swirl it around in your glass and notice how it changes. As the wine sits in your glass, even, you see the evolution of the aromatics and how they change. And sometimes it can be just a nice little experiment to kind of sit and smell your wine if you can not, have your self-control and not drink the whole glass, but and see how it changes over the course of a half an hour. It's really a kind of a beautiful process.
Wonderful. Well, Laura, I really enjoy these conversations too, because you joined our team in 2014, and I just feel like with every conversation we have, I just have more knowledge to take away, which I love. Adding more to my wine knowledge. It's so appreciative. So I just wanted to mention to everyone, if you'd like to purchase any more of these wines that we enjoyed, if you want to restock with some of that Sauvignon Blanc or Petit Syrah, or you want to try something different, please go to cliffhamley.com. I'm going to drop this in the chat for you all. And you can receive 20% off any order of $100 or more. This does exclude our single vineyard wines though. And just use code NVM101. And this is going to be expiring on February 20th. So be sure, stock up your cellar. If you're almost done with your running, order that wine so you have something to celebrate. So I'll be sure to drop that in the chat. Well, Laura, it looks like we have some questions coming in. Derek is asking, how do you think the Petit Syrah compares to a Rioja?
Yeah, I think it's going to be it's going to be bigger and more tannic and have more concentration. I think Petit Syrah really has this powerful way of gripping on your palate. And so I think you'll find the Petit Syrah to be a lot more concentrated and a kind of a heavier, bigger wine. And a Rioja, though it does have some structure to it, maybe a little bit softer and more elegant. Kind of more of a masculine, feminine version right there. That's a perfect example.
Awesome. Well, one last, before we leave everyone this evening, before we have our parting words, Laura, what do you have going on in the cellar right now? Are we bottling, are things coming out of the barrel? What do you currently have going on?
Yeah, so we're in the thick of bottling season. January was a huge month for us. January is the bottling month for those early to bottle whites that go under the screw cap. So the Root Blanc and the Rosé. And this is from last year's harvest, the 2020 vintage. And then the early to bottle reds from the 2019 vintage. So those are all of our Grenache and Zinfandel. So all of that happened in January. It was a busy month. I had 4 bottling dates. And then I've had a few weeks to kind of catch my breath, and we will get into some kind of early spring bottlings. Where in kind of the normal season, we would have our later to bottle whites like Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, our Oakenol Sauvignon Blanc. And then we move into the summer months where we do our 2019 Cabernets. Those have about 22 months of aging. So with that, it's getting the wines up to tank and blended. And the blending process is really, really important. That gets to a lot of kind of bench top trial tastings where I decide how I'm going to put these wines together. And that might be blending different varietals together, or it could be blending the oak component versus the stainless steel component and how those two pieces come together in a Sauvignon Blanc, or how those press fractions get blended in. Do I keep them or not? Sometimes they stay, sometimes they go. So blending, lots of tasting. And it's winter here still. So although we do get some sunny 70-degree days, we're hoping for more rain. And then in the coming weeks, in an early season, kind of mid-March, in a cooler season, mid-April, the vineyards will start to wake up and the growing season for the next vintage will be underway. So it's bottling season for me for now. And then I always look forward to getting back into the field in the early spring.
Yeah, I have to say Napa Valley is absolutely beautiful right now with the mustard popping up, and the weather has been quite gorgeous as well too. So I just love all the seasons that happen here in Napa Valley, and those seasons also reflect different times that our winemaker has in the cellar, bottling, all that good stuff. So wonderful. Well, I just want to thank everybody again for joining us this evening. Don't forget to keep up your miles so you can win all the great prizes during the marathon. Laura and I did want to extend an invite to you all. If next time you're in the Napa Valley, we would love to have you join us at our tasting room. Or if you can't make it out here, we can always bring Napa Valley, like we did this evening, to you right into your living room. So we do host virtual tasting experiences. So you can reach out to virtual@cliffamily.com. We do this for celebrations, birthdays, anniversaries, or you just want an excuse to see your family and friends. It's a really great way to connect, enjoy great wine, and great food pairings along with it as well. So thank you again for joining us. Good luck on getting some more miles. And again, cheers to all of you. Thank you so much.
Cheers, everyone. Enjoy.